Hello, you're watching World Talks on TVP World. My name is Sascha Fahrbach. A mother and her 10-year-old son were killed in Ukraine by Russian drone attacks overnight, part of a series of strikes that have also resulted in additional death and injured dozens across the country. Amid ongoing violence, the United States is pressing for a summer deadline to end the war, while Kiev warns against agreements made without its consent. We now discuss the latest with Andrew Tettenborn, professor of law at Swansea University. Good to have you back on TVP World. With these latest attacks just overnight and also on the weekend, what do you make of the severity of them, and how do they impact any kind of, let's say, indication of what Russia wants to do next?
Well, I think this is Russia trying to show its strength in front of the United States. Russia, of course, is aware of one thing, which is that it has enormous advantages in winter when it can do its best to prevent Ukraine heating itself. But we're coming to the end of winter, and I think Russia is trying to put pressure on the United States. Whether that pressure will succeed, I must admit, I'm not entirely sure. Because if you look at the talks last week in Abu Dhabi, the impression I get is that those talks were entirely inconclusive and that the parties remain as far apart as they ever were. Now, I may be wrong about that. But as far as I can see, in Abu Dhabi, what was on the table was a proposal that Ukraine simply give up Donbass, perhaps with some slight sweetener on the basis that it should be a free trade zone. But that's clearly unacceptable to Kiev. And I don't think there's very much more on the table to move things forward.
Yeah, and I think that's also a question here. We've had these negotiations. Now, some say they've been upgraded to trilaterals. As you said, there haven't been really any breakthroughs. There's supposed to be more on the horizon. But then when we have continued strikes, as you said, during the winter time, especially when Ukraine is very, very vulnerable, I mean, what does that say? I mean, we always tout these talks, and there's only limited information the public is getting out of them. But are we moving in any way sort of towards a realistic, tangible outcome here, and also the June pressure of what the United States has now said also put on the table?
Well, it's very interesting that you ask about the June deadline. My instinct here is to be extremely cynical. Trump needs peace in Ukraine just as much as Ukraine does. And there are two things to bear in mind here. One is that Trump is an incredibly vain man and is desperate to be seen as a peacemaker, and will carry out any negotiating ploy he can to see whether he can achieve this. The other, even more cynical point to make is that, of course, June happens to coincide roughly with midterm elections, where Trump currently, I think, is facing quite large defeats. And I think the reason why we have the June deadline is that Trump is trying to salvage something from what may be something of a wreck in June.
Mm-hmm. Interesting point there. Also, it's the 250 years anniversary of the United States. That's coming up in July. So you're saying that he wants to use this as a kind of special event. But at the same time, I want to also get into this new package, so-called Dmitriev package, what's being called. $12 trillion. This is supposed to be U.S.-Russia economic cooperation. First of all, again, what does this indicate? I mean, we don't have so many details, but again, this sort of additional layer of peace negotiations, where does this take us?
Well, I must admit, I'm a little bit doubtful about the whole package anyway. $12 trillion is, I think, something like 4 times Russia's entire GDP. And I'm not quite sure how Russia can offer that to the United States. If you read between the lines, as far as I can see, a great deal of this involves a request by Russia for technology transfer and, frankly, for sanctions lifting. It's obviously not put in that language because Ukraine would object very violently, but one suspects that that forms a very large part of it. What Russia has done, I think, to sweeten the United States is say that United States multinational corporations might get first dibs when it comes to certain Russia energy developments. But we don't know much more about this package. I just wonder whether the United States will accept it. I have my doubts.
Mm-hmm. And also, just in the mix, I'm curious to get your view. I mean, we've had this apparent, the Russians saying this apparent assassination attempt of a high-ranking general who is apparently now conscious again. How much is this going to be now included in the narrative and negotiations? I mean, it's not the first time something like this has happened. What do you make of it?
Well, I think Russia is clearly Ukraine are clearly very, very good at covert operations. And I strongly suspect that Donald Trump will have this information fed to him by his national security advisors. If anything, it may persuade Trump not to give away as much as he might otherwise want to Russia, because there is an underlying sympathy, I think, between Trump and Putin. Trump rather admires Putin as he sees it, an effective leader. Anything that goes to show that Russia actually is more vulnerable than Putin would like us to think is very likely to help Ukraine in any trilateral negotiations.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, looking at all these different points, we have economic pressures, we have, we keep talking about red lines with Donbass territory, deadlines. What in your mind, from, let's say, an internationally just, durable peace, what needs to be included at minimum here to move the needle forward in any kind of durable negotiations?
Well, while Ukraine remains fighting, certainly I think it must be accepted that Donbass remains Ukrainian. I strongly suspect that a certain amount of Crimea probably would have to be given back as well. I think that there is a very long way to go unless and until Russia can show that it is definitely winning. It seems to me that I'm afraid this is a show which is going to run and run. What I think we will see is probably more deadlines from the United States. You have to remember that Donald Trump is by instinct a real estate negotiator. He makes an offer on a piece of real estate and says, I'm walking away unless you accept it by a particular date. He wants that real estate. He'll be back. And I think it's the same with Russia and Ukraine.
And then just, I want to draw on your legal expertise as well. I mean, we've had frozen conflicts in the past. I mean, we look at, for instance, Georgia. What is the, let's say, the inclusion here, or let's say the challenge that we don't end up in that situation? What does international law say about all these things? Are we moving towards that, helping us here with Ukraine or not?
I'm not sure whether international law really comes very much into it. We're talking very much of the laws of war. We're talking very much what may get past the United Nations. In the theory of international law, there is no doubt that Russia is in the wrong. But then, after a time, despite any theories of international law, some invasions have ended up successful.
Yeah.
International law, in the end, doesn't have the force to enforce the theory.
Yeah, all these complicated issues, and something we'll be covering indeed as we hear more from the trilaterals and the situation in Ukraine. Look, thanks so much for all that. Really appreciate it. Always a pleasure. Andrew Tettenborn there, law professor at Swansea University.
My pleasure.
And thank you for watching. That concludes World Talks, but stay right here on TVP World for more news and commentary. Goodbye.